Hey everyone, my name is Peter Zaitsev, and I'm a founder at Percona, and I was involved in open source database industry for more than 25 years. So that is really an interesting opportunity to talk about what is going on right now and how AI is impacting databases, specifically in terms of the database operations, what we referred as AI, DBA, or self-driving databases. So first, let's talk about where does the term even comes from. And this term was coined somewhere in around 2017, but no one else but Larry Ellison himself. And he was really using that for launch of their product of Oracle Autonomous Database at that time. And they choose this term to kind of have a parallel with self-driving cars, which was obviously another big theme of the time. When it comes to the databases, what Larry was talking specifically is about self-provisioning, self-tuning, self-patching, self-securing, and self-repairing, with the goal being to eliminate the DBA for routine operations. And I think this routine operations is very important because we will see for the rest of this presentation what there is really those two very different goals what DBA has is routine operation on one side, and another is kind of a more strategic, which is a completely different ballpark when it comes to AI. So if you guys don't remember, when you talk about the cars, we are talking about 5 different levels of automation when it comes for driving, right? That ranges from level 0, no automation, to some basic driving assistance and so on and so forth. And then level 5, that means the full automation in all conditions, basically just like humans do, right? You can take a car and go, in some, weird country or in a desert, and you are, hopefully able to drive it. Now, if you think about cars at this point, we have a level 4 automation, right? For example, you can take Waymo taxis in San Francisco and a bunch of other areas, and they work, pretty well. Or we have like level 3 automation with, Teslas and so on and so forth. But we are not level 5 even with the cars. So where are we with the databases if you look at the comparison? Well, it's mostly level 2, right? When you have, certain things, and some of level 3, right? Where we kind of have automation, specifically some of advanced SaaS databases can, for example, do indexes and so on and so forth, right? But I would not even compare that to level 4, right? Where you will say, hey, in a certain kind of workloads, we'll let AI to drive our database automatically. And I think this is in part is driven by the confidence where the DBAs think about their databases and AI ability. I did this poll last month, kind of preparing for this talk, and we can see what a very few people would choose to AI to fully drive your database for you. Now, of course, you should note what this is. This is biased. Of course, in my network, there are a lot of very, very skilled DBAs, and of course, they are very skilled. And then people, often overestimate their ability compared to everybody else, to other humans. And I think in this age, you can talk about the same estimation compared to AI. Now, one thing in this case is it's very hard to get some stats about how well AI really is able to drive database this way versus humans, right? It just, hard statistics. But I think what we have in this case is some stats about their self-driving cars, right? Like I looked up stats for the Waymo, right, because it was really operating driverless taxis for quite a while right now, and we can see what it has roughly 2.5 times less crashes compared to humans. Even I think most of the human drivers believe they are much better drivers than AI. Now, I think the challenge here comes from humans being humans, right? I think if you look at this case, if you look at some specific human in some specific situations, right, of course, would be able to figure out things better than AI when it comes to cars, or actually, database as well. But here is something what human has as a problem is maintain sustaining attention is hard for us. A lot of problems, again, where it having the car crashes or databases comes from losing attention at some time. Now, for example, many DBAs, which I, talk to, had an experience they would, for example, drop the table in production instead of the test system, right? Well, why was that? Well, because kind of they got distracted, they missed something, right? And they had sort of all the skills to prevent that thing if you would be really just very closely paying attention to that. But at that time, just they didn't, right? Maybe they had a, fight with their wife in the morning, or I don't know, but people can lose attention sometimes, right? And the second thing is a variance of skill. All the humans, they have a skill which is very varied, right? And then we cannot sort of, well, we have education materials, training, and so on and so forth, right? But we cannot really clone the knowledge of humans in the same way as we can do with AI. And that is another danger, right? When we are building systems to be operated, we have to rely on the humans who have a variable skills and largely unpredictable compared to AI, which may be less capable right now, but that is able to maintain attention 100% of the time and doesn't have that skill variance. Another thing for us to consider is, of course, items of availability and cost. I remember there was some tests about the tuning the databases, right? And then there was one very, very skilled DBA who was able to, beat automated tuning, right? And they can say, hey, humans can still do it. But the question is, in this case, is what that is the, best DBA with unlimited time to do it, right? And that is not really what they're talking about. What they're talking about is typically with resource and time you have available. If you think about the databases, most of the teams out there, especially if like a smaller businesses, startups, we do not have really DBAs on the team. And typically, it is developers who are not deep database professionals. They have to figure that out. And even if they can figure it out, spending a lot of time, there is an opportunity cost, right? Should I ship some more features what my users care about, or should I fix the database problems? In many cases, folks really want to focus on shipping more stuff because that is what in the end defines business success when it comes to startups. Now, I think it's also interesting to see what the different problems in a database space, they can have a different costs and different sort of recoverability, right? For example, in many cases, you can scale the database by a credit card, especially by the cloud. We see it a lot, right? And frankly, guys at the clouds, they like it very much. Hey, database is running slow, just scale to the higher instance, get a better storage, and so on and so forth. Now, and in this case, of course, you spend more than you should. But the thing is, at any time, you can come to optimize the database and scale down. Now, another problem is you can have performance which impacts your users' behavior or happiness. Maybe they're not buying as much stuff, reading as a lot of things, like complain to you saying, "Oh my gosh, like why is this taking so long?" Again, it is bad because it has a longer term effects on on your business if some users may be abandoning it, but that's also largely fixable. Then there is the performance, which is so poor, what isn't indistinguishable from downtime, right? I mean, if it takes the web page to load for half an hour, maybe technically loads, but nobody will wait so long, right? Then there is even more impact. But again, it is uh, fixable. And in many cases, it is also not just the database which can impact that. For example, we have seen so many cases over the last 2 years when one of the hyperscale clouds goes down and then everybody is down for number of hours. And then guess what? It's not good for them, but they recover, right? And I think all those things, that is where having the AI DBA and allowing that mistakes is kind of more feasible. There, I think the key, which is extremely hard to exposure, is a data loss or exposure of that data, like security hacks, right? If AI chooses you to put your backups on S3, which is publicly accessible, well, that can be something which will be very, very expensive to recover from, right? And that may as well kill the customer trust to business, right? And that goes to what I said in the start, right? If you think about that, there are other scope which is much more more feasible, right, to outsource to AADBA than others, then it costs maybe very, very hard. Now let's talk about some performance optimizations specifically. And I think in this case, we'll see a lot of focus those days with many tools coming from the database parameter tunings. It was very interesting to see how diverse the answers were. And I think they all can be correct, right? Because you can see some environments which are, maybe simple. Maybe it happens to be what defaults work good for them, and there is not a lot of things what AI can do. And then there are some others where defaults are absolutely horrible, and there is a lot of room to optimize, right? Then that's where more than 5x can come. And I would just highlight what I've seen, all of those examples, all of those ranges in production. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about that AI for performance optimization, which I think is quite interesting because it can go in a different levels, right? We find quite a few tools which are focused on the configuration optimization, right? And I think that is something which is rather well defined, and it's also easy to make it safe, right? For example, you can choose for a database saying, hey, you can choose those parameters in those ranges. You avoid those because they change database behavior. For example, you do not touch something which will change the consistency or durability, right? But you can play with the rest. You can also do the same with environmental scale, right? There are a lot of solutions which can say, hey, we are going to automatically scale up and down databases for you, which also worked pretty well. Then the next stage would be something like schema and storage configuration. Maybe you are adding indexes or enabling compression or some other storage options for the system cell. We have some emergent tools in this case, though I would say these are often involved with a human input. Then you can get for even further saying, hey, you know what? Take a look at the query and there is a better way to rewrite it. Well, that is, again, we have a tool exist, but because in this case, you typically have to go in the code and that query may be kind of coming through some automatic generation process, right? Maybe we have some AI coding framework would be able to kind of to reverse engineer and see how to change the code so it can generate the query which is better than a bad query, but I haven't seen that used that much yet. And then I think the most important one, which is I think is a very far from reach yet, is over application architecture. Hey, what database should we choose to begin with, right? Can we employ caching? Are our users going to be okay with maybe getting 5 seconds stale data somewhere? And I think this becomes hard because that involves more and more business decisions, right? We need to decide what our humans are going to be like and not like. And in many cases, that is, well, a human needs to take decision. Sometimes that may have some legal implications, right? Which go, for example, on the contract stage and so on and so forth, right? So that is where complete automation is hard for now. So I think that is where we can see the human tasks are very important, is understanding really business goals and trade-offs and picking the compromises. Because when it comes to the databases, there are quite a few what you can make. For example, you can choose, do we want to be correct versus fast? Caching. Do you want it cheap or reliable? How many essentially, nodes you want to have in a cluster? Do you want to fast or do you want to reliable? Do we want, for example, to do a synchronous replication versus different geographic regions, which inevitably increases the latency, but that makes sure your data, can survive their nuclear attack, right? There are a lot of those trade-offs we do, right? And on the other hand, where I think the humans are not as good is their follow through, right? In many cases, when the changes needs to be done by human, and that could be organizational policies, contract, and so on and so forth, right? There can be a lot of difference between understanding what something needs to be done and actually doing that, right? Many humans, for example, know it's good for them to exercise, but they don't do it. When it comes to organizations, they kind of inherit all the human problems from individuals, but also kind of increase them because of internal organizational politics, where you can find very often what organization understands what things has to do something, but it's not getting done because of, some, very important things, which let's call, some organizational bullshit, just for lack of better name. Now let's talk about the AI architecture, how that AI can play with database and where its play could be. One is the overlay control plane, and I think that is how most of the AI solutions are built this case, and then is embedded in a database engine. And this is not one or another. I frankly think that there is a space for each of those if you really want to build the best AI-enabled systems out there. So let's talk about what I mean. Overlay control plane, that means there is some sort of AI which is run separately compared to engine. It's kind of similar to a human, right? It can, think about as AI agent, it watches the database, analyzes the data, makes decisions, and that gives us a very flexible AI agent style implementation, right? You can use a different kind of models to drive it. You can implement that in any programming language and so on and so forth. Now, the problem here in this case, of course, it has a limited information available, only what the database chooses to expose. And while it can be very powerful, analyzing that information and maybe analyzing everything what exists in, LLM, using, some searches to supplement the information it has, right? It's kind of slow to react because of all that kind of asynchronous behavior. So for example, if you're saying, well, you know what, I have somebody attacking these databases and I need to decide right there in a process where I should allow or reject this query, and I need to do it in a fraction of milliseconds, those systems are not good for that. Another thing I think what is interesting here is what a lot of telemetry we have is kind of was mostly designed for human or observability systems used by humans. Also the knobs, for example, often we're saying, hey, you know what? We want to limit number of knobs or number of settings what database exposes, because if there is like 5,000 of them, then humans cannot possibly understand it. Well, guess what? That is not a problem for AI. AI can work with a lot more telemetry data points and knobs to drive the best outcomes. And I think that is very interesting is how this, AI first observability will be evolving. Now let's think about the part of a database kernel. That is something which is hard to implement because a lot of databases, they are written in like a very specific programming language, very hard standards, right? If you look at open source databases, getting the code in can be hard. They also get to operate with limited resources, right? Like if you're inside a database kernel. But a good thing about them is they have like a full information available, right? If you are operating inside the database kernel, you can look at everything in real time, react and inject. And I think there is a lot of opportunities to do better comparing to what we have, right? If you think in this case, if you look at the many databases right now, Postgres, MySQL, you will find there are so many things which are very many fixed, right? Or we have an algorithm and it works this way. It's going to give like a fixed or configurable number of pages, right? We have ideas about, well, can you estimate how much a page cost would be versus in-memory operation? Why, as a human, I have to do it? And why do you think that's even going to be static in the dynamic environments? It won't, right? I think what we are looking in this case is we should be implementing much more dynamic algorithms, right, which are ready to evolve with the dynamic systems, dynamic workloads, and so on and so forth. But I think this is a danger, right? And I think that is fundamentally why many people are not very eager about that, right? Because what really happened with AIs, with LLMs, right, for example, is they became too big, too advanced, and impossible to comprehend, right? It's, we have it trained on the data, and then on given input, it gives us given output, and well, we don't fully understand why, right? And yes, there is, let's say, some research going on and explainable AI and so on and so forth, right? But inherently, most people don't, right? And I think what we often value about the databases is that kind of predictability, right? We kind of reason about that. Oh, it's have this output of this count because this is how PostgreSQL works, so some database works, right? And I would be ready for that database if we don't understand that. If you would give a workload and let's say PostgreSQL code base and give that to AI and say, hey, please rewrite this freaking database so it's the best for executing this workload. And now it works, but we don't know how. How many DBAs would be comfortable of allowing things like that in production? Well, probably not many of those days. So that is, I think, brings us to this big question about trust into AI. And I think there are two basic operation modes how we can so-called AI DBA being enabled. One is after execution. Then you can say, hey, you AI DBA, you found something to do, how to tune parameters or maybe add an index or something. Just go ahead and do it, right? And if it doesn't work, roll it back, right? Or we trust you to do it safely, and so on and so forth. And the second one would be a human in the loop, saying, well, AI suggests something, human approves it, right? And then AI implements it. Or even in the current world, maybe we are going to a system to say, hey, you know what? I will let you AI to advise me, and I will actually implement that myself because I don't really trust you yet. I think overall, as the AI tools increase in maturity, there is going to be more and more trust to the after execution. And I know with databases, I've seen that in, for example, MySQL space when it comes to failovers. Initially, we had this kind of an immature system which will handle high availability. What you would want often is for human to be paged and say, hey, your primary MySQL server is down, and then you press a button, the failover happens, you verify what everything worked out correctly, go back to sleep. As we have to deal with the larger and larger systems, you can think about, MySQL on a Facebook scale. Well, that doesn't work anymore because failovers have to happen way too frequently, right? But also what that means, because it happened so frequently, the code was polished and the trust was increased. So I'm saying, hey, you know what? Don't wake me up. You need to fail over. Wake me up only if there is some shit going on, right? Which is unexpected and, that failover process went wrong. So I think similar things are going to happen with AI. Okay. Now we started this presentation to talk, to ask questions. Are we ready for AI database? And I think there is this scorecard as we are right now in the early 2026. And again, this is subjective. I think your point of view may be different. I think when it comes to technically, well, it's partly. There are certain things which can be automated very, very well, and AI is very capable of doing that. Organizationally, well, I would say rarely, right? I don't think there are a lot of organizations as happy to embrace AI to full of its technical ability right now. But that's obviously going to be changes. Culturally, well, as we see, not quite yet, right? A lot of DBAs, they are not really to embrace AADBA. And I think the interesting problem here is what that also means what a lot of organizations, they may not have DBA, and developers are much more ready to embrace such solutions because they have no choice. And when it comes to economical, well, the questions as usually, it depends. Obviously, I think the larger systems, you will need a lot of automation. Otherwise, you do not have, humans. On the same time, I know a lot of very small environments where you can say, hey, you know what? I have my WordPress. It's running MariaDB or MySQL with defaults, and everything is just fine. I don't need to subscribe to some SaaS DBA to AI to manage my database. So that is where it depends. Now, if you think about the long term, though, right? I think what AADBA is inevitable for most environments. Because if you think in this case, right, compared to humans, AI have so many benefits, especially in this sort of our constrained environment of a databases, right? Which is run in a very sort of, state machine environment, right? It doesn't really interact with a messy world, right? Of in what, for example, cars have to operate in, and it has so many benefits, right? It's never slept, it can follow instructions repeatedly, and so on and so on, right? But I think what that also applies is to the operational DBA. And that is where I think we need to be really separating those things where the DBA as somebody who keeps your databases up and running versus the DBA as an architect, as a business partner, somebody who can figure out things which actually needs to be done, and then the processes which you need to do, right? Which may be, connected to promises you are giving to your customers. And then you can manage AI to essentially operate that for you. So for now, if you think the best outcome, as we are kind of getting ADBA being more and more capable, I think your human DBA and your AI DBA kind of have to become their best friends. And that is probably how you can provide the most value to your organization. With that, that's all I had, and would appreciate your thoughts and feedback.